When the classical Greek meta was soft-launched around 700 BC, it included several city-states like Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos. Most city-states had a specialized military class known as hoplites, named after the special circular shield, the hoplon, which they carried into battle. One class in particular stood out, the Spartan hoplites. Trained from age 7 in the Agage, they lived solely for war, famously equipping large bronze hoplon shields, often marked with a lambda, and dory spears to dominate land battles, unlike other hoplites from neighboring maps.
You, there. What is your profession?
I'm a potter.
And you, Arcadian, what is your profession?
Sculptor, sir.
However, the Spartan hoplites were known for their lifelong dedication to the battlefield and knew no other profession.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Today, we'll be examining if the Spartan hoplites were truly OP or were they simply carried by nostalgia and pop culture. Let's run the numbers and figure out truly where they belong on the tier list. The Spartan hoplite build appeared in its final optimized form around 500 BCE during the Archaic period of ancient Greece. By this point, the Spartan faction had already committed hard to a military-focused civilization tree. It dumped most of its skill points into combat effectiveness while neglecting economic and cultural development paths that other Greek city-states were exploring. This wasn't a balanced build, as it was min-maxed to an extreme degree, and like all min-max strategies, it came with serious trade-offs. The Spartan hoplites had one absolutely cracked stat, which was defense. Further breaking down each gear and each defensive loadout, the Spartan stats are truly awe-inspiring. First was the hoplon shield, which was the Spartans' legendary weapon. The hoplon was a massive round shield weighing 7 to 8 kilograms constructed from wood and bronze. It covered the wielder from shoulder to knee. The hoplon wasn't just for personal protection though, as it had huge multiplayer benefits as well.
In the end, the Spartans' true strength is the warrior next to him. So give respect and honor to him. It will be returned to you.
The way you held it meant the left side of your shield protected the teammate standing to your left, while the teammate on your right protected you. This radically buffed the defense stat of the entire multiplayer formation and meant individual survival heavily relied on group coordination. The Corinthian bronze helmet, meanwhile, provided full face coverage with only eye slits and a mouth opening. Although it was quite heavy and restricted peripheral vision stats, it offered excellent protection against headshots and projectile damage. In a phalanx formation where you didn't need to look around much, this trade-off made sense. The next important piece of armor was the bronze cuirass worn by early Spartan hoplites. They boosted soldiers with slash and stab resistance, but were expensive to craft and maintain. A combination of solid physical armor with the phalanx formation, which was basically a dense line of overlapping shields and forward-thrusting spears, meant that the Spartan hoplites had arguably the best defensive infantry unit in the classical Greek meta. In ideal conditions of flat terrain paired with military discipline, this defense was practically impregnable. We're going to give it a defense rating of 9 out of 10. Spartan hoplites had very high health for a human infantry build in their patch. This wasn't due to raw tankiness like later heavy armor builds, but because of two key factors. Agage offline training system. From age 7, Spartan males were spawned into ranked maps where they underwent brutal conditioning. They had to wrestle fellow ranked Spartan kids, experience controlled starvation as a lesson on resource scavenging, endure long matches across mountainous terrain, and the wildest one in my opinion, kill Spartan slaves on sanctioned hunting trips. Yeah, these practices created exceptional resistance to fatigue and injury tolerance. The Spartan health perk was also functional for its time. It may not have been as advanced as later Roman supply chains, but it allowed the Spartans to maintain consistent rations during campaigns. Their infamous black broth, or blood soup, was calorie dense. Surprisingly, wound treatment and bone setting were well practiced. A health rating of 8 out of 10 means excellent stamina and pain tolerance, but lacking in the advanced healing tech of later eras. When it comes to damage output, the Spartans weren't actually that special compared to other hoplite builds. Their damage per second came from the phalanx formation rather than individual power. An important weapon was the dory spear, which featured 7 to 9 feet of ash wood with an iron tip. Although it had decent armor penetration, it wasn't a one-shot weapon. The real advantage of the dory spear was its reach. A single hoplite could attack from behind the shield wall or from the second and third rows of the phalanx. Multiple spears could therefore focus on a single opponent while maintaining a defensive posture. While the spear was perfect for ranged attacks, the Xiphos sword was a short, leaf-shaped backup blade for close-quarter 1v1 duels when formations broke. Effective, but not a DPS monster. A strength rating of 7 out of 10 signifies good damage through coordination, but underwhelming in 1v1 scenarios. Now, here's where the build really struggled. A fully equipped hoplite carried roughly 20 to 25 kilograms of gear, not including rations or camping equipment. That alone massively debuffed movement speed. What saved them, though, was their insane stamina training. Spartans regularly marched 20+ kilometers per day over harsh Greek terrain with minimal rest. This strategic movement around the map was quite good for heavy infantry. However, their mobility in combat was absolutely terrible, because the phalanx was essentially a moving wall. Mobility rating of 6 out of 10, due to good strategic movement but poor tactical agility. The intelligence and strategy stat needs context. Individual Spartan soldiers weren't encouraged to think creatively, because the phalanx didn't exactly allow for individual decision-making. Every warrior was drilled endlessly on positioning, timing, and coordination until it became muscle memory. But the collective intelligence of Spartan formations was absolutely remarkable. Commanders like Brasidas and Cleomenes weren't just charging blindly. They understood how to force enemies into unfavorable terrain, rotate the formation, and even when to refuse battle. Individual Spartans, therefore, were running optimized playbooks rather than making dynamic decisions. An intelligence rating of 7 out of 10. Spartan armies were led by kings or veteran elites, but their true strength was morale. Trained together from childhood, their cohesion was unmatched, and the stigma of desertion, which was either public shame or exile, reinforced extraordinary discipline and fear resistance. However, Sparta's infrastructure was limited. With lean, localized logistics rather than expansive supply networks like Rome's, they were effective in regional Greek conflicts but struggled to project power or sustain long overseas campaigns.
Persian cowards!
Despite their undeniable strengths, the Spartan build had some significant minimal stats. One of the most glaring was its extremely limited player pool. Spartan citizens were already a tiny minority within their own territory. Additionally, the brutal agage system, which many didn't even survive, meant they had an unsustainably small recruitment pool. Consequently, losing even a few hundred hoplites in battle was catastrophic for Sparta in ways it wasn't for Athens and other city-states. An incredibly rigid meta dependency also meant that the entire build was locked into one strategy: phalanx formation on favorable terrain. If circumstances such as rough ground, naval combat, or even siege warfare didn't allow that, the Spartans struggled badly. Advanced technology could have addressed this challenge, but that in itself was difficult due to the poor Spartan economy, which was considerably weaker than that of other city-states. By dumping all skill points into the military, Sparta neglected trade and innovation. As a result, their economy relied on enslaved helots who outnumbered citizens 7-1, creating a constant internal threat of rebellion. This also meant it was difficult to scale the army. Unlike other successful civilizations, Sparta's system made this nearly impossible. You can't just recruit more Spartans into the military when each one needs at least 13 years of training. If you wanted to hard counter a Spartan hoplite without outnumbering them or breaking the bank, your best bet was the Thracian peltast, a light infantry build focused on highly mobile and ranged harassment, as well as flanking. A historical example of this was the Battle of Sphacteria, 425 BCE, during the Peloponnesian War. Elite Spartan hoplites got isolated on an island and were surrounded by Athenian forces, including peltasts. However, instead of direct assault, the Athenians used constant hit-and-run javelin harassment. The Spartans, unable to close the distance or break formation safely, eventually surrendered. This strategy worked because phalanx formation struggled against sustained ranged attacks from javelins without direct melee contact, which the Spartan armor was built to counter. However, A more balanced fight was the Battle of Thermopylae. A small Greek force, including 300 Spartans, held off tens of thousands of Persians for 3 days. Despite the overwhelming cavalry support and archers of the Persians, the Spartan phalanx formation in familiar narrow terrain nullified the Persian threat. One famous Spartan legacy was their communication style. Known as Laconic communication, as it originated in the region of Laconia, it was characterized by extremely brief and direct speech. A famous example occurred when Philip II of Macedon sent a threatening message saying, "If I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and raze your city." The Spartan reply was one word: if. So, where do Spartan hoplites belong on the tier list? The Spartan model was highly dependent on terrain. It was vulnerable to mobile and ranged units, and struggled with adapting to evolving forms of warfare. But in peak terrain conditions, the Spartans were a top-tier defensive infantry build with maxed-out discipline and morale stats. Their elite training mods and near-perfect execution mechanics made them OP within their specialized role. In comparison to a true S-tier, therefore, the Spartan hoplites fall slightly short. For reference, the Roman legionnaires would be S-tier. They had similar discipline but added flexible tactics, engineering capability, and the ability to adapt to different enemies and terrain. Spartan hoplite was a masterclass in focused excellence. They identified one combat role, which was the heavy infantry phalanx warfare, and morphed it to near perfection. In their ideal scenario, they were almost unbeatable. But almost unbeatable in ideal scenarios isn't the same as overpowered. A final rating of A tier indicates an elite specialist build but with significant limitations.